So Luke, slow news week, huh?
Yeah, I know, Michael. The first week of 2021, and it's already an absolute banger. We've had a lockdown in the UK, and over in the United States, pro-Trump rioters stormed the US Capitol building yesterday. I'm sure everybody's heard about this. Actually, you know what, Michael? Was it really a storming, or was it more of a scuffle? I say that because that's what Laura Kuenssberg, our BBC political editor here in the UK, tweeted. And I just look at that tweet and I'm like, wow, yes, the US media gets a lot of hate, but imagine if the UK media was covering this. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, the pro-Trump rioters, like I said, stormed the US Capitol building. And, well, here's the thing. Did they actually storm it? They were just let in by the looks of it, to be honest with you. You know?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, that like police just literally let them in. So I don't know if the storming is the best description. But anyway, they were doing it in an attempt to subvert democracy and keep Donald Trump as president of the United States, despite him losing the 2020 election. Congress was in the process of voting on ratifying the Electoral College vote, which would see Biden as president, and that eventually did go ahead. So that is all confirmed. He will be president in a couple of weeks. But this whole thing was a pretty big deal, considering this is meant to be one of the most guarded buildings in America. I remember when I went to the US Capitol over a year ago, and there were police officers lined with guns outside the door, and it seemed like, oh yeah, you did not want to do anything around here because you would get arrested or perhaps worse. But yeah, apparently the police did not seem to care this time. They were taking selfies and just kind of just ushered them inside, and they don't have the excuse either that these guys. They didn't know what was going to happen because Trump supporters had been bragging on the internet for literally weeks that January the 6th they were going to try and do this. I remember seeing a Ben Garrison cartoon showing this patriotic eagle, which you can see on your screen, circling the 6th of January. Like, this is the date. And yeah, apparently the Capitol Police were like, oh yeah, we didn't know. We had no idea this was going to happen. I say that's a bit of BS. And of course, many people made the comparisons to the Black Lives Matter protesters, who, even looking the wrong way at the police, they got absolutely whacked with a baton. So yeah, what do you think of the events yesterday, Michael?
I almost have this really strange theory that I feel might be true, that it's possibly because they know that these Trump supporters don't have a legitimate grievance, that they're willing to let them get away with this stuff because they kind of view them as harmless. This is the idea I have in my head. And obviously, yes, the police are definitely going to be more right of center, but I kind of feel like it's one of the reasons why they like to crack down on the Black Lives Matter movement is because they know the Black Lives Matter movement has a legitimate grievance. And they're like, oh, well, we can't really let them get away with this crap because if we do, then people might start paying attention to them. They might start being seen as legitimate. Whereas with the Donald Trump people are just like, these guys are just crazy and they're just complete lunatics. Just let them do what they like. Obviously, that's not to ignore the much more substantial point that, of course, there's going to be many other reasons why the police might be more sympathetic to Donald Trump supporters than Black Lives Matter supporters. But I do think there's a part of it where people just don't care as much because they know these guys are just lunatics. Whereas with legitimate protests almost get treated with more scrutiny.
Yeah,
so that's kind of my interpretation.
I don't know about that. I think you see 84% of cops voted for Donald Trump. A lot of them are probably agreeing with the protesters outside before they turned into rioters. Maybe they didn't agree with the rioting, but certainly the protesting, yes. But let's talk about another question, Michael, which has come up. Was this a coup attempt? And I am going to say, because obviously, they didn't succeed. It wasn't very well organised, of course, but I think, yeah, it was an attempted coup. It was a really shit attempt, but that still makes it an attempt. There were people there with weapons, and had they got their hands on, say, Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi or even Mike Pence, although that certainly would be harder to do since he's the vice president, would they have taken them hostage? Yes. Or killed them? Maybe. Like you said, these guys are lunatics. And so that's why I don't really get, your idea of, the police weren't concerned with what they could do because, it's literally an incredibly important building, and if they are lunatics, who knows what they could try and do. And of course, what they were there for was to have Donald Trump installed as president almost as a dictator. That's what they were there for. That was their ultimate goal. So yeah, it kind of seems like a coup, even though it's quite pathetically done. And I know some people on the contrarian left, or I guess the cool left, may try and laugh this off. That's a term I use, by the way, cool left. I've just invented it. They want to laugh this off and say, look at these morons. Kind of like you did, but not exactly. One has dressed like a deer, I think, and some of them look completely senile. There was only a couple of thousand people there. But because of the lack of police action, who literally opened the gates and, like I said, took selfies, there's a chance that some serious damage could have been done. The coup, of course, would not have been successful. The military would not be on their side. And, of course, I don't really care that Mike Pence or even Pelosi was in danger. But there was a non-zero chance that protesters could have taken politicians hostage, like I said. And, I bet they would have loved to get their hands on, say, Ilhan Omar or even AOC, for instance. And I kind of like those politicians. So, and yeah, they're enemies number 1 and 2 almost on the Democratic side, maybe behind Pelosi actually. So yeah, there's that, and also there were bombs found at the RNC and the DNC and on the Capitol grounds too, which thankfully didn't go off. But if they had, innocent lives could have been lost. Not Trump supporters or any politician you don't like, just innocent people. And also there is this thing which keeps cropping up in my head. They might try this shit again in the future, given how successful they were. Like, this isn't the end point. This is maybe just a process. And look how far they got, and they didn't even try. Imagine if they did try, on a second attempt and were organised. What then? So yeah, that's why I take this quite a bit more seriously than some people. So yeah, overall, I think it was unlikely anything was going to happen, but that doesn't mean there wasn't a small chance something could have. And who knows how small that chance was, but it definitely was not nothing. So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, people have that whole idea about when a white person goes on a shooting or something, they're not called a terrorist, whereas obviously if a person of colour does, they are. This is kind of like that, but on a countrywide scale, where you have to think, if this happened in Africa or the Middle East or Latin America, I swear in Latin America, a left-wing leader gets completely democratically elected, and that's a coup. So, but it would obviously be considered a coup, and it would be considered a really serious issue in terms of the democratic legitimacy of that country. Whereas obviously, I think a big part of it is people are like, well, America, they're just not the kind of country where this stuff happens, are they? And I think that's part of where the narrative that it's not a coup comes from. I also think it's possibly that many Americans still believe in the inherent legitimacy of American democracy, and by extension the American executive office, and therefore a part of them must be like, well, these guys, they can't be that bad. And I do think that might be where the logic comes from, that ultimately they have to believe America is still fundamentally a democratic country, and therefore they're not going to want to concede that what was basically a coup happened. And yeah, I agree with you that these people, they would have and could have made a serious effort to achieve some very unsavory goals for anybody who supports, the basic standards of democracy.
Yeah, exactly. And on that American exceptionalism thing, there were people, say Jake Tapper of CNN, say, oh, it's like Bogota, the capital of Colombia, but even though nothing has happened like this in Colombia for decades, and yeah, it's just American exceptionalism. The people saying Kabul in Afghanistan, this shit happens there. It's like, well, why does that stuff happen in Kabul in Afghanistan? It's because of America. If you think about it, a coup in America is one of the most American things possible, really. It's one of the most successful exports. So, Michael, let's now look at the journey it took to get here. A pro-Trump mob breaking down the Capitol, windows, doors, trying to get in and overturn a democratic election to install Trump as dictator. It's a long journey. If we look at the 1960s, Goldwater, trying to usher in the crazies into the GOP, because at the time the GOP, very concerned about the fact that the Democrats had a seemingly big majority of the working class. Goldwater says, hey, let's get these people in who are crazy concerning religion. Then we had Nixon employing his Southern strategy in 1968 and 1972, getting working class whites to turn against working class blacks. That was very successful all across the country. Ronald Reagan doubling down on that. And then we have George Bush stealing the White House in 2000, who, ironically, by the way, said what happened yesterday was disgraceful. It's the kind of thing that happens in a banana republic. And of course that is very ironic, considering the US is responsible for coups in banana republics. That's why they're called banana republics. But if you steal an election via the courts, like Bush did with the outright political corruption that he employed, well, that's much better. Men in expensive suits subverting democracy is not a coup, you see, that's just politics. And then after Bush, you had people like Mitch McConnell saying out loud in 2010 that the GOP's main priority should be stopping an Obama second term. And that was all the Republican history since the 60s up until Donald Trump. And that's key, because basically the point I'm trying to make is the Republicans have been crazy for a while. They have been doing quite heinous, undemocratic stuff for ages, basically scapegoating minorities long before Donald Trump came in. But then, of course, you get to Donald Trump. He wins an election, and the second time he doesn't, and because of who he is, he refuses to concede. You have Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, and crucially 128 other Republicans yesterday objecting to the ECVs being certified even after what had happened. So, yeah, it's not just Trump saying, oh, I lost the election because of election fraud, I'm actually the winner. You had some senators who obviously are looking at 2024 and running for president, like Hawley and Cruz, but 128 Republicans in the House who also did that. This is something that is not just concentrated within Donald Trump. This is a rot within the whole Republican Party. And a perfect example of this Republican rot is from Kayleigh McEnany, who yesterday sent out a tweet saying, does anyone truly believe that the anti-military, anti-police, Fidel Castro-inviting, Reverend Wright, loving Marxist, embroiled in a child abuse scandal, won fairly in the state of Georgia? I don't. This is, of course, a reference to Raphael Warnock managing to beat Kelly Loeffler yesterday in Georgia in the Senate race. And then a few hours later she tweeted, we are the party of law and order and must always support our police officers. They are heroes and embody the best of America. With 3 American flags after, which I found quite funny, the contrast. You incite people to say, hey, this election was stolen, look at what's happened, and then, oh, look at these consequences. But basically there has been a fascist streak within the GOP for a long time. That's the main point. They view Democrats having power as an affront and almost illegitimate. You know, they are fundamentalists who, at the end of the day, want to slash taxes and start wars, and they'll do anything in their power to make sure they implement their political agenda, which is why they've been so much more successful in recent decades than the Democrats. But the point is, it's not just Trump who has created this. It is the Republican Party creating the conditions for Trump. What do you think about that, Michael?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is that the Republican Party have always been involved in suppressing the vote, and we spoke about this. I can't remember when we spoke about this, but the idea that going out to vote, wanting people to vote, is considered in America a democratic platform, and again, not democratic in the sense of democracy, but in the sense of the Democratic Party, that is wanting people to vote is something which the Democrats are in favour of. And meanwhile, the Republicans, of course, do support significant amounts of voter suppression and will pretty much do whatever they can get away with. And the big thing is, I think, with the Republicans that makes it so interesting, is it's barely even targeted. I mean, it is targeted, obviously, in the case of ethnic minorities and stuff. But the funny thing is, and I think the funny thing about Trump having done quite well with minorities is I suspect that even then Republicans are still going to want to target, just try and get as few people to vote as possible, because ultimately they know that the more people that come out to vote, the worse it'll be. And that inevitably is going to lead to a situation where they're priming people to not care about the democratic process. And obviously, I guess that is the big difference. Liberals, as we've said before, they're all about the process. They love the process. They think the process is what achieves results. Republicans, they actually want to succeed in their policies, and the process is just a means to an end. And therefore, they are going to be much more willing to try and subvert the process when they can. And that's pretty much what we're seeing. I mean, these are not people, and I do wonder how many of these people even are, and that's a big question, how many of these people are even true believers? How many of these people really believe that the election was stolen versus how many of them are
on the
using it as
Republicans?
convenient yeah. Because
none of them do. Not even Trump
that.
does. That's the thing. Not even Trump actually believes it. But he knows he can convince his base. And you made a very good point, Matt. That's the thing. Republicans, they are an anti-democracy party. And that's where the fascist streak comes from. They do not believe in everybody voting because they know if everybody votes, they're going to lose. But they recognise that, yes, they have to suppress the vote, but they also, at the same time, have to somehow get people to vote for them. You know, and like I said, they want to cut taxes, they want to start wars, etc. It's in a very unpopular stuff doing those two things. But that is, of course, where Fox News comes in. Fox News, of course, was launched in the mid-1990s, and to say it has had a big effect on US media is quite an understatement. I think it's fair to say they've turned their viewers into far-right fascists who only think that Democrats are treasonous and that liberals are trying to destroy America. And that is how, you get people to go out and vote for Republicans, if they think that if the other side wins, their country is going to be destroyed. And that's what Fox News has effectively done for the last 25 years. It has created a situation where Republican voters think anybody other than Donald Trump as president means that America has been lost. And of course they did all this so, rich people could get tax cuts and so on. But yeah, this massive fascist blob that Fox News and the GOP have helped foster, managed to grab Trump the nominee in 2016, You remember, Fox News actually didn't like Trump in 2016. They liked like Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, but they were forced to back him after seeing that he was overwhelmingly popular with the Republicans. It was like Frankenstein's monster, if you will. I'm sure many people made that comparison, but it literally was what it was. And now that monster is literally threatening the likes of Mitch McConnell and Mike Pence, in the Senate. And, they literally could not control the hatred they inspired, and that led to Donald Trump being the GOP nominee. And there's another quote that I saw, which is from The Nation. Apparently, Trump supporters said yesterday, "This is not America." Her voice was shaking. "They're shooting at us. They're supposed to shoot Black Lives Matter, but they're shooting the patriots." Again, they have this entitled view that, yes, they are the rightful owners of America. And that comes from America's past, of course, but that has been pushed so much in the last few years in the Trump presidency and before that by Fox News and the whole Republican ideology as well. That has combined to create that kind of view, which is, of course, racist. It's definitely racist. And, just completely crazy and insane at the same time. But, Michael, do you want to talk about the future now?
Yes, apprehensively.
Yes, apprehensively is a good word. So a lot of people were anticipating Republicans to take a step back, and some have, but also some have not. This is a clip from Matt Gaetz earlier on today. Let's see what he had to say.
Some pretty compelling evidence from a facial recognition company showing that some of the people who breached the Capitol today were not Trump supporters. They were masquerading as Trump supporters and, in fact, were members of the violent terrorist group Antifa. Now, we should seek to build America up, not tear her down and destroy her. And I am sure glad that at least for one day, I didn't hear my Democrat colleagues calling to defund the police.
So you recognise the applause at the end to that line. And it's funny because the police actually did seem like they were defunded yesterday, given their lack of reaction. But the first part of that, not the little quip at the end, the first part of that is quite interesting because he's saying it was Antifa. And, he's using some bullshit reasoning of face recognition, which was completely untrue, of course. And even Sean Hannity last night, a very popular Fox News host, of course, said, it was Antifa as well. And this is interesting to me because they are trying to convince themselves that they are the good guys. And they are doing this despite what happened yesterday still. But I don't think it'll work out since, here's the issue, many Trump supporters were proud to be there. They don't care about the optics like Hannity or Matt Gaetz does, trying to prove that right-wingers are better and, winning the argument and owning the libs and the media and the Democrats. That little quip at the end, it's like, how we got you. It's like, well, the supporters don't really care about it. For example, after the election, prominent conservative commentator Tomi Lahren, you probably heard of her, said, quote, "If real Donald Trump were to lose, he won't, lol. His supporters will go back to work tomorrow just as we do every day. When Biden loses, his supporters will likely loot and riot. Tells you everything you need to know." And there is this element among professional right-wingers. I've noticed this in the media in the UK as well, but just let's talk about the US media, that, the left are all mobsters and rioters and looters, and they're uncivilized, and it's in an effort to basically squeeze the left wing out of, being acceptable. It's basically not acceptable to be left-wing, demonizing them for political gain and all of that. But the issue is that when you say stuff like that, well, look at what happened yesterday. And you can see that there's a disconnect between people like Tomi Lahren and even Matt Gaetz and even Sean Hannity to the base of the Republican Party, who care about actually fighting back. They don't care about the optics. They have been radicalized so much. They don't care about, Kellyanne Conway or Tomi Lahren owning people on Twitter. They don't care about that. They care about having their God Emperor Donald Trump as president.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I find interesting is that obviously there's this comparison made, and of course, this I assume what Tomi Lahren was talking about was the fact that people did protest Trump's presidency. I do think there's an important distinction that needs to be made between the protesting of the president by the left versus the protesting of the president by the right. Because the left, when they protested Donald Trump, they were not protesting saying this was an illegitimate election and Donald Trump should be kicked out of office. They were protesting just to say we fundamentally disagree with Donald Trump. Whereas this protest, which is being done by the right, is to say we fundamentally disagree with the process and we want the election overturned and Donald Trump to remain president. So those are two very different things. I think the interesting thing about it is that I don't think the Republicans even could do a left-wing style protest, because a left-wing style protest is, we disagree with this president because of the harmful things he supports. And I think really Republicans can't really do that because they can't argue policies, because as we've spoken about many times, the broad strokes of the Democratic policies are actually quite popular. So the only thing they can do is attack the idea of the Democrats as this inherently, intrinsically evil cabal. And that is, and I would echo the words of Tommy Lauren, it tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of my opinion on it.
Yeah, no, you're right. They're not actually backing anything, but just having like Trump in charge. So of course, if Biden were to lose, kind of like when Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, there'd be a lot of people, left-wingers, disappointed, but you wouldn't see what you saw yesterday. Obviously, you didn't. We were alive 4 years ago. We didn't see Hillary Clinton supporters storming the Capitol. And yeah, you make a good point in the distinction between left-wing protests and right-wing protests, and why if right-wingers have protest, it's always going to be, hey, we want to overturn democracy. And it's always going to be threatening for that reason. And if we have a look at the polls as well, we can see that this is from YouGov, 45% of Republicans approve of what happened yesterday compared to 43% who didn't. So more Republicans approve of the storming of the Capitol than don't, which is kind of wild. And, you think of Matt Gaetz saying, like, oh, this is Antifa. It's like, no, most Republicans like this. Most Republicans actually support this, which is why I find the contradiction quite interesting. Also, 2 in 3 Republicans said that people threatening an actual democratic institution, Capitol Hill, as it literally conducts democracy, was not a threat to democracy either. So we're talking about 66% of Republicans were kind of fine with that. And yeah, they think basically democracy means our guys being in charge, and that's it. And the question really going forward is, will they turn on law enforcement now? Because of course they had that Blue Lives Matter flags, they were supporting the police, but now the police pushed them back. And, eventually they did it. But I don't know. Or will the police become more pro-Trump? Because 84% of police officers voted for Donald Trump in the 2020 election. So this is where I'm thinking, this could go either one of two ways. They could dissipate and realise, oh, the country isn't on our side, or they could be emboldened by the fact that the police just let them at it, and they could, seek to do this over and over again. And yeah, maybe the police just stand aside again, because certainly Trump isn't going anywhere, as we know. So yeah, the future, it's interesting and also scary, Michael. I'll say that. What do you think?
I would say it's very hard to predict, because ultimately it could just be these people flexing their muscles, and the fact that they got such a small amount of pushback means that they're going to keep doing it because they know they can get away with it. But then there's an equally high chance, I'd say, that they were doing this to try and get some kind of reaction. They were doing this to try and cause some kind of effect. And the funny thing is that because the response from the law enforcement was so farcical almost, and basically just letting them walk in, that the whole thing just came across as almost absurdist and bizarre. Therefore, I'm not sure if they're going to get any meaningful momentum out of this. It's just like, they did it, it was crazy, it was mental, and yet, is it going to have a massive effect on the zeitgeist and the culture of these Republican Trump supporters? I'm not sure. I think they'll just say, wow, that was easy, and then they're not going to know what to do next.
Yeah.
So nothing will happen.
Yeah, hopefully that's the case, and just because of their sheer incompetence, how unorganized they are, you would assume that would be the case. But, I don't know, man. I mean, we have seen throughout history, you don't really want to keep going down this path. And I do think there's a likely chance that what we saw a few days ago was a one-off, a really bad day for America, one we won't see ever again. But yeah, it's not as unlikely as you'd like to think.
Do it! Just do it! Yes, you can!